Okay, this is part two on the Americas, our sort of second attempt, our second phase. And when we talked about the Andean civilization last time, now we're going to talk about the Mesoamerican civilizations. Okay, Mesoamerica, as you can get a sense of if you look at this map, was probably the densest populated, or at least in terms of civilizations, area for the Americas. And you've got a couple of different zones that are of particular interest. We'll be talking about the Mayans, which is in that green area. We'll be talking about the Aztecs, which is that orange area. And let me see if it's here on this. And we'll also be, I'm not seeing it marked here. We'll also be talking about some other places as well, which are apparently not marked on the map. My apologies. Some central concepts that sort of tend to go with a lot of the Mesoamerican thought processes. One of which is a way of thinking of the cosmos as having three layers. You have the underworld, you have the world that people live in, you have the spirit world above as well. And that blood sacrifice is a way of bringing those worlds together and nourishing the spiritual world and the physical world as well. And so that sense that through blood as sort of the most potent form of human life, that is a way to nourish that world, to make those connections between humans and the spirit world. And it also plays out in a tendency to fight wars for captives frequently, seeing as an important benefit. For the Mesoamerican civilizations, time was thought of as something that moved in cycles. And astronomy was popular because it was a way of trying to chart those cycles and chart the movements of time. And to a certain extent, this was important to them because history was a predictive science, that time wasn't just neutral, different every time around. Instead, patterns repeated. So if you could study and understand where you were in the cycle and you knew about the cycles that had come before, you could sort of predict the kinds of things that would be likely to happen in a given time period as the cycle continued. Not that the exactness of it necessarily, but at least a hint about what was likely to be a problem or something to be faced. So part of the reason why they were very concerned with thinking about history, about studying the stars, about trying to have a sense of time, was because it was a way that they believed that they could try to control the future and prepare themselves for what was going to come. Teotihuacan, 400 to 600 CE, was a major city, 125,000 to 200,000 population. It was built around an alliance of wealthy families who were the rulers, and a number of farmers who worked for them, possibly through force, particularly at the end of their time period. One other thing about Teotihuacan is a lot of their power and influence became because of their success as a trading center, as a center for people to come to. And even when the city was faded, when after it falls, it remains as a memory for people of what to look back to and see as sort of a great city, a city that they want to be like as well. Classic era Maya. This is a reconstruction, an attempt to try to show what this Mayan city might have looked like, Copan in this case. And you can sort of see you can see the temples, you can see the areas surrounding it, the little farming compounds. You can see the central religious center. Okay. The Maya began with, and they end up long term after the fall of the big cities, as farming villages. And in those villages, they think that probably some rich farmers prospered and the poor farmers went into debt. Over time, the rich farmers take what they are doing well with, the extras that they're producing, and they use it to gain luxury ritual goods, through trade, things from exotic locations, things that are of value, and they use those and their control of those and their ability to give those things to others to become chieftains, local leaders. And over time, some of those leaders, some of those chieftains, gain enough wealth to just become themselves, to become kings, to build up military power to support them. And what develops from that are a series of city-states, independent politically, frequently engaging in warfare with each other, so independent and not necessarily happy with each other, but still sharing a basic language and culture behind it. So much closer to the model of other city-states that we've talked about, where you may share a culture, you may share a language, but that doesn't mean you get along. That doesn't mean that you all belong to the same rulers. The kings themselves demonstrated and proved their power, in part because they acted as shamans, making offerings. And in this picture, you can actually see the queen is making an offering of blood. And I don't know if you can see it, but she has a rope, which she's running across her tongue, and that rope probably has thorns on it. So she is offering blood as a way of communicating with the spirit world as part of the power that makes kings shamans, and royalty shamans in this case. A redistribution of goods. What comes in from warfare gets given away to the various members of the army, the elite, to support them and to encourage them to remain faithful to the king. The kings might be shamans, but they also had to prove themselves as war leaders. They couldn't be people who were just sitting at home, leaving the fighting to someone else. For the Mayan civilization, like we talked about, blood sacrifice is critically important, and blood nourishes the spirit world and gods. It frequently could be something that was offered by the ruler or the priest themselves, particularly blood taken from your tongue, elbows, penis even, bleeding and making that powerful offering of blood, but also through sacrifice of others, captives. And so this is a mural that shows the captives who have been taken by the king, and they're being offered up as sacrifices and offerings. And interestingly enough, I got this picture, this copy of the illustration from an Ohio State research report, in which they actually said that, I don't know if you can see that detail, the scribes in there have had their people who make their living writing and recording. They're being forced to sort of record their own executions, and then also they're probably breaking their fingers. And so possibly what's going on there is it's a king who has won, knowing that the scribes, the people who keep the records, are the ones who keep and record the power and the authority of the kings themselves, and sort of as a way of destroying his opponent. He's not just destroying him in terms of warfare, but he's also destroying him by killing the people who would record and memorialize his existence, sort of trying to control the history that follows. Astronomy and calendars. One of the things that the Mayan are known for is their studies. I talked a bit about the studies of time, cycles of time, trying to predict the future, keeping records, but they kept extremely detailed astronomical records, written records, and studying astronomy seriously involves also using math as part of it. And they are known for using in their mathematics the concept of zero, one of the first people to do that. The collapse around 900 CE of the Maya, and actually they collapse a couple of different times and come back. But really what happens is the Maya don't simply disappear, they just leave. And some theory is that maybe there were too many nobles that they were having to support, the peasants were having to support. maybe some kind of problem with disease, maybe trade fell away, it was no longer there. Maybe the farmers just decided it wasn't worth it and left. But the Maya don't disappear. They simply go back to living in villages, and the great cities are left behind. The Aztec Empire. You'll notice their capital of this is Tenochtitlan in the Valley of Mexico. Tenochtitlan was the center of the empire. It was the pride of the Aztecs. It was the center of tribute, of trade, all of which would come into the empire from the people that they conquered, the people that they traded with, and then it would come through and be processed through the city itself. One distinctive thing about the city, if you look at this, is that it's actually a city that is built literally on the lake. And if you look, you can see that a lot of what surrounds that city are actually floating islands that have been built for farming to float on the lake itself. Trade was critically important to the Aztecs. Aztec merchants actually had elite status, not as high as warriors, but high compared, particularly when we look at other civilizations, which often tended to sort of look down on them. They were encouraged. They brought in exotic goods. There was also intensive farming to produce things. And if you were to visit Tenochtitlan and sort of see there, what you would have seen was a crowded marketplace with a wide array of goods, and also places like taverns for people to get together and drink and talk. And that's what you're seeing right there, is a man illustrated as selling various vegetables and green goods. The Aztec itself, the empire was built on conquest. In fact, the Aztecs initially were refugees that found work as mercenaries fighting for hire, and then eventually built up their own empire. So at the center of the concept of the Aztec male identity was that of being the warrior, the fighter, that you see in the illustration. And that was sort of the goal. And in fact, if you were a successful warrior, if you could capture a number of captives, if you could prove yourself in war, you could actually gain elite status, even if that isn't where you began. I think it's also worth noting, too, that childbirth was seen as a form of warfare. So just like a man, through his success in battle, could prove himself and gain status, a woman, through her success in childbearing, could prove herself and improve her status. As the Aztecs grew and they made their conquests, they demanded from the people they conquered both tribute and captives to be used for sacrifices. The Aztecs had the advantage of having much more advanced weapons than most of its opponents. And the fighting that took place was still in sort of the model of single combat, one warrior on one warrior. And that was encouraged by the importance placed on captives, prisoners of war, because it was easier, if you're going to try to capture the enemy, to do it in single combat rather than fighting as a group. They would be fighting as a group in the sense that everybody's there at the same time, but not in any kind of organized formation or way like we've talked about with the Assyrians and some other empires. The fall of the Aztecs, it's going to be pretty much the same kind of thing that we saw when we talked about the fall of the Incas, in that it involved the disease that was brought by European settlers, the invasion by the Spanish, and also rebellions and work against them by their neighbors. Basically, both the people who had been conquered and the people who thought they might be the next to be conquered by the Aztecs allied with the Spanish in order to get rid of the Aztec overlords.